A river flood occurs when a river overspills its banks, that is, when the flow can no longer be contained within its channel. When there's more water than the river channel can hold, this more water would overspill on its banks and it's going to cover the areas around it. In this topic, we are not talking about the yearly flood which takes place in the active floodplain zone. We are rather talking about the flood which takes place every 7 to 8 years, and it is due to result of as a result of torrential rainfall or maybe glacier melt when there is high influx of water, and excessive amount of water would also cover the old floodplain zones. The next question that might come in your mind is why a river floods? What happens every 7 to 8 years that causes severe flooding? So, the natural factors which can cause flood are the common factors such as rainfall, heavy monsoon rainfall specifically in Pakistan, because most of the amount of rainfall that Pakistan receives is due to the monsoon system. So it's obvious that it usually happens in the summer months. So when there is extreme monsoon system which would cause torrential rainfalls, this can lead to river floods because a lot of water or a higher influx of water would be in the river that would cause flooding. The other natural reason is melting of snow during summers. As we all know that these temperatures increase during summers, and also in the highland areas temperatures relatively increase. So what would happen that glaciers, which the part of glaciers which have reached near the relatively lower altitude in the mountains, and the snowfall which had taken place during winters, it would start melting. So obviously, where does this water go? We have been studying about the rivers of Pakistan, the water resources of Pakistan, and we have studied that the northern mountains and the glaciers and the ice caps, they all they all supply water to river Indus and its tributaries. So obviously, when in the mountains the snow is melting, the water would be released in the rivers. So if a lot of snow is melting, there would be a higher influx of water in the rivers, which would cause flooding. And all of our rivers which drain the Indus plain, such as Jhelum, Ravi, Chenab, Satluj, and the river Indus itself, they all originate from the mountainous areas. So if the snow would be melting there, it would be leading to a lot of water in the river. Thus, it would cause flooding. So these were the natural reasons. Now let's talk about the human reasons. Human beings have been messing a lot with the nature. We've been changing the natural environment into human environment, and we have done quite a harm to our planet. So the first thing, which is the cause of many other disasters, this is cutting of trees or deforestation. As we have already studied that the trees hold on to soil, and when there is rainfall they act as barrier. Rainfall, when it hits the ground, its pressure breaks and there is higher absorption or higher infiltration of the rainwater, and the surface runoff, that is the movement of water on the surface, it decreases due to forest. But what happens when we cut the trees on the foothills, on the mountains, and rainfall would occur there? There is nothing to hold the water or to act as a barrier or to act as a hurdle. So water would be gushing down the mountains. It would be moving downwards with high velocity, and it means there would be more amount of water coming in the rivers. Thus, it would cause flooding. The second human input or factor is written here, which is failure to strengthen or heighten embankments alongside rivers. So if you remember the topography of Indus plain, you would remember we studied that levees are present on the either side of banks. They can be man-made and they can be natural. These are basically embankments, which if made by human beings, their purpose is to keep the water confined in the river channel, so that water remains in the river channel, it doesn't spill out. But if we fail to strengthen them, if we don't make them strong, if we don't increase the height of embankments, what would happen whenever there would be higher influx of water in the rivers? It would overspill. If the embankments are not high enough, then ultimately when there would be more water, it would come out over its banks. Or if the embankments are although high but not strong, and there comes a high influx of water or more water in the river is there, so the pressure of water is going to cause failure of these embankments. They would break and the water would be on the plain area, causing destruction. So this is how human beings cause river flooding. Third point that is mentioned here, it says dam failure to store extra water due to less capacity. So why do the dams have less capacity? What's happening to the dams? Again, deforestation is the culprit. What do? We are unable to make more dams. So instead, whatever dams we have, we should make sure that they have enough water holding capacity. But unfortunately, our dams do not have the water holding capacity they had at their beginning. Why? Because of siltation. If you remember siltation, it's the deposition of sediments in the reservoir. When there are a lot of sediments and silt settled down at the bottom of reservoir, what would happen? It is going to fill the space that is to be otherwise taken by the water. So what is happening? We are reducing the water holding capacity of the dam. So when the water holding capacity decreases, the dam reservoir is unable to hold the water it should be holding. So what would happen if there is more rainfall, if there is glacier melt or snow melt? There is higher influx of water in the river, so our dams would not be able to hold more water, and eventually we would have to release the water from the dam, because we do not want to fail the dams, we do not want to damage the dams. So we would have to release the water. When we release the water in the river channels or in the canals from the spillways, what would happen? The higher amount of water in the rivers would be more than the water capacity of river channels. So what would happen? The water would come over its banks and would cause destruction. So that is how the human beings have been causing, our actions have been causing river floods. So flood is a natural hazard which causes damage to our properties, to human beings, to animals, and in general our economy is devastated as a result of flood. So what actually happens to different groups of people, to different areas, if a river flood occurs? So the first thing that we are discussing here, how the farmers are affected, because these people are the most prone people to a river flood. They would be mostly affected due to a flood. So what happens when a river flood occurs? You can see here that the 3 to 4 points are written that the farmers would not be able to use the land until the flood water has drained away. So before that, farmers in Pakistan are usually growing 2 crops per year, specifically in the plain areas, in the Indus plain. So if they are growing 2 crops a year, there must be something grown on their fields when this flood would occur. So if the flood occurs, whatever they had been growing, it would be destroyed, because there is a huge amount of water which has filled their land. So all their effort has wasted, and all they had invested in their farm, obviously it is wasted. And now they would not be able to use their land unless the water recedes, unless the water is drained away, which is not going to happen very soon, because there are usually huge amount usually huge amount of water as a result of river flood. All right, other than crops, we are not only talking about the arable farming or cultivable farming here, cultivable land here, we are also talking about how the livestock is affected. So obviously when the human beings are losing their lives, how would they be able to save their animals? The animals also die. And other than that, it not only affects the agriculture sector, specifically crop cultivation and livestock farming, it affects the fisheries as well and forestries as well, because if we talk about the fish farms in the plain areas or in any other area which is affected due to river flood, if flood occurs there, do you think the fish would be confined in the fish farm any longer? So this would also be destroyed. And other than destroying these basic facilities of the primary sector, the primary infrastructure would also be damaged, such as tube wells, water channels, and the household storages of these farmers. Most of the farmers store their seed stocks are stored in their homes. The animal sheds would also be destroyed or damaged. And fertilizers, obviously, if they have fertilizers stored, the farmers have them stored, or the whoever is selling these fertilizer, they also have a storage somewhere, so these would also be affected. And whatever agricultural machinery is present in the nearby areas, the farmers, obviously they are practicing agriculture, they must have agricultural machinery. So if water damages everything, do you think the agricultural machinery would be saved? No. So the machinery would also be damaged. So if the flood occurs right before the harvesting of crops, it's going to cause damage to the crop, it is going to cause damage to the belongings of the farmer. If his seed stock or fertilizer stock is damaged, and his machinery is obviously damaged as well, so he is going to face a lot of problems in the future. All right, next what do we have here? How the local residents are affected. If their houses are not flooded, if they are living on a higher ground and the surrounding area is flooded, they would not have any contact with the people outside, and eventually they would run out of their food sources, specifically unka drinking water. They would not have enough drinking water because all the water sources would be polluted due to flood water, and which would spread waterborne diseases. And if the houses are made up of mud, what would happen to the houses? Obviously these houses would be severely damaged. And other than that, if you talk about the roads and transportation authorities, as far as we talk about the transportation only, not the infrastructure. If we talk about infrastructure, obviously if it's severe flooding, the electricity supply, the telephone lines and rest of the supplies would be severely affected, and roads and railway tracks as well, because infrastructure is extensively damaged. And in the mountainous areas, if we talk about the mountainous areas, many bridges collapse. Why? Because there is a higher amount of water, and in the mountains the velocity is the highest, so a lot of bridges in the mountainous areas, they collapse. So connection in between the cities, or from one side of the valley towards the other side of the valley, is simply cut off. They would not be able to communicate, and phone lines, electricity supply would be interrupted, as not only in the villages but also in the larger towns. The property of the people living in these areas would be affected as well. Their houses would be flooded, their belongings, which might be precious belonging. They would be losing some of it, and people would be losing their lives as well, some directly due to flooding when they would drown, and the other when they would drown, and the other due to waterborne diseases. So floods are again natural hazard, and which affects not only the population, their infrastructure, but the living beings, other animals in that area as well, and which affects the economy of Pakistan. We often associate floods with damage and devastation and destruction, but this is a natural system, it's a natural phenomenon, and it causes some benefits, it brings some benefits as well. Now we'll discuss what benefits does a flood have. So the first thing is it recharges the water sources. Not only there is a higher amount of water downstream in the river in the areas which are towards the southern parts of the rivers in Pakistan, which usually get less water because we've been holding water in the reservoir, we've been diverting water, there is less rainfall, and due to other reasons. So it recharges the water sources. If the flood occurs, the water is spread on the floodplains as well. Now the water which is spread on the floodplain, it's going to recharge the groundwater. How does it recharge groundwater? The water which is spread on the active and old floodplains, it's going to be absorbed in the ground, it's going to be released slowly in the river as well. So not only it's recharging or refreshing our groundwater sources, which are used in the areas which do not get supply of water by the river, but this groundwater is slowly released in the water bodies as well. So this is how it recharges our groundwater sources. And other than that, if you talk about the oxbow lakes which have been cut off from the river channel, the abundant river channels, the abundant lakes, they would also get filled with water when there is going to be a flood, when there is going to be a river flood. This water is eventually released in the groundwater sources. It is released in the river itself with the passage of time, and this can be used by the population living nearby. It would help the habitat, it would help the living beings, the animals in that area. Other than that, what else do we have? It helps agriculture as well, because the flood water carries soil particles, sediments with it, it carries nutrients with it, which are deposited on the flood plains, which enriches the soil or makes the soil fertile. And what would happen when the river water is receding, when it recedes, when it drains out or it's absorbed, it leaves behind a new layer of alluvium, which increases the fertility of soil. So it is going to be beneficial for agriculture in the future. Now how it affects the fisheries? Now a river basin is an ecological unit which is connected with a lot of which is providing habitat to a lot of animals. So a variety of species in our aquatic system would be thriving, and what would happen, the parts of the river in Pakistan which are towards the south, the area near the deltaic region where we have blind dolphins, they are sort of endangered. Why? Because we've been releasing less water towards this part of the river. So if there's a river flood, these parts of the rivers would also get a good amount of water, thus the aquatic life would be thriving in this region as well. Other than that, it refreshes the river ecosystem. There are a lot of fish, wildlife, and the water itself is important for the human beings. So what would happen if there are a lot of sediments in the river? These would be washed away, they would reach to the deltaic region, with the higher influx of water. So our deltas would be thriving, there are chances of growth of delta, and if there is pollution which is present in the deltaic region of Pakistan, specifically towards the east of Karachi, so this pollution can be washed away for a short period of time because of this flood water. Other than that, the sediments and the nutrients which are brought by the flood water in the deltaic region, they are going to help in the growth of mangroves, in the growth of delta itself. It is going to help the fish which are found in the deltaic region, which are found on the continental shelf near the delta of river Indus. So a river, it's not only a hazard, it's not something which has all the which can be attributed to only negative aspects. It doesn't bring destruction always, it has some positive aspects as well. This is how what makes it blessing is how we manage it. If we are poor in management, it's going to cause a lot of destruction. So in the next slide, we'll see what can be done to reduce the effects of a flood. There are a lot of ways in which we can manage flood. We cannot completely prevent it from happening, but we can reduce its effects by doing certain measures. Now, how can we manage floods? First thing which comes in our mind is building more dams, and many dams and their reservoirs are specifically designed to store water when there is heavy amount of rainfall. But unfortunately in Pakistan we do not have a lot of big dams, and the smaller dams do not play a huge role in flood management. So the first thing which could be done is building more dams. Not only they are going to prevent flooding in the river, they are also going to supply this water, stored water, in the times of need when there would be less rainfall. So the first thing is building dams, and if we are building dams, then we can also make diversion channels. Diversion channels or the inundation canals, they carry flood water, and by making diversion canals, we can divert water or supply this flood water in the areas further away from the river. Again, there is going to be a benefit, two benefits, that it would reduce the chances of flooding in near the river downstreams, or the other benefit would be it's going to provide water in the areas where there is usually no irrigation provided, where there is water not provided via usually not provided via canal. So what can we do? We can redirect the excess water in these diversion channels or in these inundation canals. But the only issue is people cannot be completely dependent on these canals, as we have already discussed it in the water resources chapter, that whenever there is flooding, then these canals would have water in them, otherwise there wouldn't be any water in these canals. And we can increase the river defense system. How can it be done? We can increase the height of embankments on the river. Embankments, we can make them strong as well. We call them levees or bunds, which ensure that water stays confined in its channel, in the river channel. So if the embankments are strong enough, if they are high enough, the river water is not going to cause a lot of destruction. It would not be able to overflow on the banks because of the height and because of the strong nature of the levees. Other than that, what else could be done? We can also increase the width of the river channel by digging some of the soils on its banks. We can increase the width of river channel so that it can hold more water, so that when there is higher amount of water in the river channel, it can easily pass through the channel because the channel would now be relatively bigger, as it was bigger than it was previously, because more water would be easily passing from it when we have increased the width of the river channel. Other than that, how we can reduce the destruction or damage caused to the population and the crops and the belongings of the people. So we can prevent destruction by not allowing the people to construct their houses or settlements in the areas which are prone to flooding. It means the areas which are quite near to the rivers. It means we can remove buildings in the flood prone areas, and this area could be simply left for growth of vegetation, because if there is going to be a dense vegetation in the future, if a flood occurs, this vegetation would also prevent flood water from entering in the settlements which would be relatively further away from the river. This vegetation would also make sure that the water is slowly absorbed in the ground. It would help in recharging the groundwater sources as well, and the floods are also going to be less destructive. This way they would be causing less erosion as well on the banks. Other than that, what else could be done? We can inform people beforehand so that they can evacuate in time. They can take their precious belongings, their livestock, and they can move to higher grounds in the plain areas or wherever they are living, so that they do not lose their lives, so that we can decrease the death toll and their livestock is still with them and they can still start their life after the flood water recedes. So these are a few measures which can be taken. How do we announce people? How do we tell people? How do we release a flood warning? We should use the media which is mostly used by the people. Farmers usually would not be reading newspaper. So what's the best way to approach them? They watch television, people in those areas. So we can make announcements via television, or maybe the rescue parties can go and announcements could be made. Or if people are stranded in the areas due to flood, if they could not evacuate within time, so the last option we have is evacuation. They could be airlifted with the help of helicopters or with the help of boats, so that we can prevent further loss of life. So this was the topic of river floods. I hope it is clear to you. In the next slide, I have attached a video which is not about Pakistan, but whatever they are discussing is related. They are discussing how river floods are caused, or how they can damage the property, what effects are there, and they have also discussed a little about the storms, how they affect the coastal areas. So please go through that video and take notes because it's going to help.